It's The Journey with drug and alcohol attorney Mark G. Astor.
All right, everybody, welcome to another edition of The Journey. Two really great guests today. Gentlemen, welcome.
How are you?
I'm good. I've got my good friend Russell Levine, who is Director of Business Development for Archstone Recovery, and Moshe Yachnes, who's the CEO of Archstone.
Thank you.
And it's interesting because I sort of both knew you separately in different worlds, and we've sort of collided now, finally. So I'm really excited to have you on, and I had a chance to see the campus, which you've done an amazing job with, and it's really nice. So welcome. So I got to do one of you at a time. And because Russell told me that he worked with the Grateful Dead for a bunch of years, I'm going to start with a Mo.
Absolutely.
So, I did not know that about you.
Well, there's a lot of things in my life that happened a while ago, and we have I'm 60, so we've had quite a life. I mean, I started out working.
You're 60?
Yeah, clean living. I started out working at WBCN in Boston as a in their listener lounge, and that's where I met all these rock stars, and I said, this is the life.
Sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
This is the life I want. Ian Dury, right? That's what it was big. It was punk rock was back then, but I was a Deadhead. And I was the scorn of the station because I was always talking about the Dead. And when it was funny when Jerry Garcia would come into the station every now and then, they'd make fun of me by making sure there was like a listener line because they'd run a contest, so I couldn't go in and say hi to Jerry and things like that. But that's how I met the band. That's how I met Eileen Law and Susan, and they worked for the production company. So one day I just called them and I said, "Oh, I want tickets." And they just it was easy. They kept giving me tickets. And then I ended up meeting the band out in Oakland in 1979, and we were at a hospitality suite, and they ran out of beer. And I went to Bob Weir. I went, "Wow,
so
you guys
who's Bob Weir?
Bob Weir. I'm sorry,
because I'm ignorant to this stuff."
Bob Weir is the rhythm guitarist.
Jay's looking at me. Jay's laughing because he knows exactly what you're talking about.
The rhythm guitarist for the Grateful Dead, and he had been with them since 1965 when he was 16 years old, and he was a young kid when he started, and he grew up. As a lot of us did with the Grateful Dead. The Grateful Dead was his family, and that's quickly and that's where I learned a lot of things about recovery and how important family is and fellowship is. But so we're in the hospitality suite and we run out of beer, and I'm like, I don't know much about this, but you guys are rock stars and you don't run out of beer. And this was like in Kansas City or something. And so the next night we were in Indianapolis. The same thing happened again. I was like, and I can't run out of beer. I'm a burgeoning alcoholic, and all of a sudden there's no beer. I'm the guy who hides beer everywhere, and I was probably 16, 17 at the time, and we don't run out of beer. It's terrible. And I figured this is why I'm hooking up with these guys, because they'll never run out of beer. And all of a sudden we run out of beer again, and Bob goes, "Here's a credit card." He goes, "Sign it, Jerry Garcia. They'll never know." I kept that job. He goes, "You're now in charge of the hospitality suite." I kept that job from 1979 to 1992, amidst all the turmoil and the popularity of the Grateful Dead, and from starting out with little tiny hockey rinks to giant arenas. And I never went, I wasn't an official employee per se. I didn't get paid, but we had all the backstage passes we want, and we did some trading for different substances.
So what were you doing during the day? What was your sort of day
Sleeping.
job?
And I was a bartender in Austin, Mass. But I didn't really work much because we made money selling T-shirts. We made money, selling veggie burritos. We made money doing other things. We had a whole tour that the tour would last 2 months, and then we'd have like a month off, and we'd go back again. So on the months off, I'd be bartending, and on tour it was easy to make. Well, you had all these backstage passes.
So were you like, when you worked at a bar, were you like the guy that everybody knew worked with the Dead?
Oh yeah, everyone knew I worked for the Dead in a not an official capacity, but I'm the guy. You need tickets, you need this, you need that. I'm the guy. You'll know where to find me. I'll be at the hotel room. Every night at the hospitality suite, we'll be there. If you wanted to go to the hospital, if you wanted to meet the band, I was the guy to talk to. I brought in, one night in Philadelphia, we brought the Clash. We're in the same hotel, and one night, this was the great night of history. There was the Clash, Tom Petty, Bob Dylan, Chrissy Hynde from the Pretenders. They were all there. And so I invited them all.
Jay is about to salivate, that, right?
I invited them all up for a party, and the Clash came in, and I got in so much trouble because I had met the Clash back in my BCN days. And they're cutting hair, the Deadheads, and Phil, the bass player, came down. I know Jay's laughing because what do you mean you don't know who Phil is? We all know who Phil is, and because we were going to mess the whole. Somebody could have got hurt. I'm like, really, Phil? You're of all people, you're worried about who to get hurt. But from there, I learned all about family and fellowship and how to really. They were genius marketers, letting people tape and letting people get involved with themselves. And the beauty of a treatment is the involvement of your staff, the involvement of the people around you, the people you hire are so important. A lot of the bands, the roadies were the most important people there, like our techs are the most important people there. A lot of the people now that I know that have been in other bands, they have a lot of serious health issues. They've had no health insurance, but the Grateful Dead always took care of their people. And that is the most important thing. If you take care of your people in businesses, as you know, and Mo knows, that's how to make sure your clients are taken care of, because the caring goes, and that's what Archstone is all about, is the caring and the love.
Yeah, I mean, just from what I saw yesterday, it's going to be it's going to be great, really great. So I'm going to go back a second because there's a lot of interesting stuff here.
Yes, there is.
You skipped a whole bunch of stuff.
Yes, I did.
I'm going to get to Mo because his dad was a rabbi, and we'll probably have to do the whole, we've got to get there. And having been raised in an Orthodox family, I know how important that stuff is. So was there, because they say that we sort of use the phrase sex, drugs, and rock and roll, but was there a lot of drugs going on?
Yes, there was a lot of drugs. I did a lot of drugs. I drank a lot. There was a lot of fun. I had a great time. And so one night we didn't talk about this, but the end, we would stay at the same hotel a long time for like 18 straight nights so we played Madison Square Garden, Nassau Coliseum, and the Meadowlands.
Did you go to every concert?
Of course. Yeah,
and where were you, backstage?
Right by the soundboard. I was a soundboard guy. There was Heineken's right there. You can't really hear backstage. There's no fun backstage. It's a bunch of people standing around, and you can't hear. The action is out front, and the soundboard is where you can hear it the best. That is,
His left ear still doesn't work.
The Dead sound system is so good, and it's so crystal clear. And on the board, you have your own little space, and you have your own little personal bathroom, and we have your passes, and you can kind of do what you want. And you have beer there, where you don't have to get up and go, God forbid, and walk and get beer. You don't want to miss anything, and it's very comfortable. They always had Heineken's there, and I had my spot, and that's where I was for years, and that was my spot. And so we would go back to the same hotel, either the Four Seasons or the Ritz. At that point, it wasn't the Holiday Inns anymore, and it was nice. We just took it for granted, $600, $700, $800 a night hotel rooms every night. And I went back to my room one night overlooking, Central Park, gorgeous in the fall. Leaves are, stunning. And I just started crying and crying and crying and crying and crying. And I was like, I have nothing. Everything I have is fake. All my friends are based on this, and I don't really have a real life. And I guess I didn't know what alcoholism was or drug addiction was, but I had it. I just had no soul left. And I said, I have to stop. I'm losing 10 friends a year to drugs and alcohol, and I have to stop. And I just said, I'm done. And I said, okay. And my idea was, now my life is going to be much better. It's going to be, because it's easy to stop drinking and doing drugs. It's just, I'll just get a job like a regular human being. I had saved up some money, and everything's going to be okay. And it wasn't. I got out, and all of a sudden, I had a giant hole in my soul. My ego was like shot. I was now no one. I had nothing.
Did you miss the rush of being with the band?
Well, 1,000%, and no amount of cocaine. No amount of alcohol, and alcohol and cocaine makes a wonderful combination of a whole new drug, and it really affected my brain. I'm better now, but at the time, it really affected my brain. It grows back, and I was lost, and so I had nothing to do. I didn't know what to do. I knew I had to do something, and so I got to do something with my money, and so I bought a liquor store. Probably not, and not just a little liquor store.
A big
liquor store on the way to Cape Cod. And to tell you what alcohol and drugs do to you and do to your mind and your ego, the owner, who has run a successful business for 18 years, said he was going to Cocoa Beach, Florida, to buy a Dairy Queen. He said to me, Russell, I know everyone in the neighborhood. I know every person in the neighborhood. I'll stay on for free for 6 months before I go to Cocoa Beach to help you with this and show you how to. This is his baby, and I'm taking over his baby. He wanted to make sure his baby was okay. Russell Levine, as I say a lot in meetings, super genius, Wile E. Coyote, the man who knows all. I got this because I've run so many businesses in my life. This should be easy. I'm Jewish. You buy low, you sell high. How tough can it be? You know, it's simple. Funny thing about the liquor store business, it's not like that. You got to buy all this vodka at the key moment to get it at the right price, to sell it at exact cost. So you bring people in. And I was like, what? And you make your money on like cans of soda and a little, beer and 10 cents a bottle on cans. And I'm like, that takes too long. I'm much too busy for that. And I stopped really not paying attention. The first year we had over $1.5 million of sales, and I don't think I made any money because I just wasn't there. And I wasn't present, and I kept stealing from my own store. Someone kept going in at night. They had a key, and on Sundays in Massachusetts, you can't open and you can't have beer. Guess who had a key to a liquor store? I did, and I had lots of friends, and also at that point I kept getting more DUIs, and I had DUIs back when I was working for the Grateful Dead, and I ended up having a lot of DUIs. I got my license now; it's okay, but it just, I went away for a while there, because driving without a license. And then I went through my first treatment that way. I had a choice of either going to jail for 30 days or going to treatment for 2 weeks. And reluctantly, I was like, the alcoholic's dilemma. Do I go to jail? Do I go to treatment? I went to treatment for 2 weeks and pretended to learn a lot. And as soon as I got out, I started drinking and smoking.
So when did you finally go into recovery?
2005.
Okay.
I went to I went to DAF in '98. Stopped doing drugs, then my drinking took off. But in 2005, my probation officer said, I finally, for years, judges were telling me, go to meetings. I was smarter than the judges. I was smarter than the police. All you have to do is write your name down on those pieces of paper and crumble them and use different color pens. They'll never know. They know probation does not care. They just want their $50 a month. I finally met a probation officer who did care, made me go to AA meetings, had 2 different ankle bracelets, one for satellite and one to make sure I wasn't drinking, and made me go. And I sat in the back. I went to Crossroads, sat in the back for 6 or 7 months and went to meetings. And I'm like, yeah, this is all very nice. There's a bunch of born-again Christians here. They're smiling. Yes, we're sober. Isn't it wonderful? I hated them all. Didn't really pay attention. I heard a guy named Pacer Bob one day speak, and he changed my life. I was like, wow, that is the same feeling I have. And look at this guy get through this. How did he do that? Went up to him, met him. He introduced me to everyone he knew. He knew everyone. And I started moving up, and I started sitting in the middle row so I could hear more. I started paying attention. And I started sitting up front and started meeting people. And I go, wow, these people are just like me. They're insane. They just have the same problems I do, and they get over them. They deal with them. They don't drink them away. They don't tamp them down. They don't run. They don't hide. And so much trauma, so much shame that I didn't think I had. I was like, I don't have trauma. My parents are divorced and everyone drank, but everything's fine. And that's, as an alcoholic, and I see that a lot with the people I relate to every day, is, oh, we're fine, we're okay. And the parents are outraged. They're done. They're like, well, we paid, we know what to do, and they're scared. The parents don't want to admit they have a problem. Because they grew up, oh no, we don't talk about this. Our kids are fine. Our kids are perfect, and we're not. We're drinking, and we learned it from our parents.
Crazy.
And, yeah, it's a giant cycle.
So Mo, I want to talk about your background, but you have a clinical background, right?
Yes.
And also, so you and I met through the Jewish Family Services, the Substance Use Committee.
Yes. Yeah.
So there's a couple things that Russell talked about that I thought were real. Other than the Grateful Dead, which is a fascinating story in and of itself, a Jewish guy with the Grateful Dead, no less. That's even more. Jay's really starting to relate now. But the whole issue of the denial, I think that's huge. We could talk about that. And also, one of the reasons we had the committee over at JFS was because, in the Jewish community, it's not, especially the Orthodox community, the whole idea of, addiction and mental illness, not something that's sort of not really talked about, right? It's kept within the community.
Yeah.
So, let's talk about that. Maybe talk about you know what? Tell us a bit about your background, because you shared with me some interesting stuff before.
Sure. So I grew up down in Miami, actually. My father's a rabbi. My parents are community people. And just as a kid, seeing people walking in broken, crying, hurt, and speaking in the back in my dad's office and walking out smiling, and the certain just from observing that process is just serenity. That was my childhood. That's what I observed, and I respect and appreciate that process a lot. I fell into addiction treatment when I was living in New York at the time. I needed some side money, and there was a small 15-bed dual diagnosis adolescent facility. It was out in Westchester County, Mount Vernon, New York, and I decided to work there. And I was there for about 6 months, and then I got promoted to weekend supervisor, and that's really where I fell in love with the inpatient residential feel of treatment. Because what happens is during the day, the dialogue is around change and around identifying triggers and understanding the processes and the reaction, and then they have a chance throughout the evening and to really process that and to build a community, and that creates an environment of vulnerability. And the people that are there challenging their status quo really start to become vulnerable and talk about some of the challenges, and then they realize that they're not so lonely. They're not the only person dealing with X, Y, and Z issue, whether it's trauma, whether it's self-esteem issues, whatever it is at the core. Their behavioral choices is what links them together, and they start to realize that. And that sense, well, Russell, you mentioned that sense of community really takes place in a residential environment. And so I followed that, just that passion. I graduated from Fordham University, become a clinician actually in New York. And I did some clinical work, both in residential settings and in outpatient settings. I used to, had a private practice. I would refer folks that needed a higher level of care to inpatient programs. And I did that. I was clinical director in a couple different agencies. And then I just moved into the business of treatment, because what I saw was an issue that folks were not able to get to the right place in the right time and treat it in the right way. So that was frustrating for me to see and to watch. So I changed my skill set, if you will, and I really spent years studying the business of treatment and understanding what it takes to build a program, to incorporate all the different pieces. Personnel is probably the single most important component of building a strong organization. And Russell, you mentioned the behavioral health tech component to it. I believe that a conversation that a person has with their primary therapist is equally as important and can be equally as influential as the conversation they have while they're smoking a cigarette on the bench with the BHT, with somebody who's there, who's been through recovery, understands their process. And that's really what Archstone is built around. It's built around personnel, who understand treatment from a systemic perspective and who can incorporate their personal not only story, but their personal relationship with the people that we serve.
Right. So what was the facility you have now? What was that before?
So Archstone has been around actually since 2001, and one of the reasons why we acquired Archstone was very strategic, because they did some great work. They've been around the community. They're entrenched in the Lantana, Palm Beach County area. Our first event actually recently was an alumni event. We had over 50 people come, and our goal from a business perspective was to celebrate the courage of the folks that have been through Archstone. That's something that we're heavily invested in and working to try to help support in any way possible. It also serves as a link to our current patients who are currently at Archstone seeking treatment, working through their recovery. It creates a bridge to the outside world. Folks that have been through the process, that understand the chaos and understand the processes, they can learn each other and understand each other and can help develop a clear roadmap for their long-term recovery.
Yeah, when I was there yesterday, it seems like other than the structure of the building, there's new paint, there's new floors. It just smells like it's brand new.
Yeah.
So it looks like you've poured a ton of money into the place too.
Sure. Yeah. We're invested in building a quality program. Like I said, there's the clinical aspect of it, which is first and foremost. But my thinking is that people who are courageous enough to challenge their status quo, they deserve the Waldorf Astoria experience. They deserve to live in a comfortable environment, to eat quality food, to sleep in a quality bed, because they're challenging their status quo. At the core, addiction is the disease of escape. That's what it is. And whatever we can do from a business sense to help support that process, we're committed to doing.
So tell us about the different levels of care that you have there.
Sure. So thanks for mentioning that. That's actually an important piece. We're really able to capture a person's full continuum. They come in, we have detox, a highly sophisticated medical team with many, many years experience. Our medical director has been doing this type of work for 35 years. He really understands. He's a neurologist by background, so he really understands the condition of addiction. A lot of folks are scared to get into recovery simply because it's uncomfortable. It's a painful process, and it is. So the notion that our medical team understands that and are sophisticated and educated enough to be able to treat that process appropriately is extremely important to us. And I'm committed to staffing appropriately. Our director of nursing has been doing this for 15 or so years. She actually took off the last 2 years to teach nursing. She's in a PhD program herself. She's a researcher by passion. We're talking about cutting edge treatment and real understanding what from a provider perspective, we have a good understanding of what works when it comes to, medical detoxification services. We also have residential level of care as well. So once somebody's feeling a little bit better, they're able to begin their process of, okay, what are next steps for me? Now that I can breathe and I can eat and I can use the bathroom, they want to start establishing their roadmap, and that takes place at the next level of care, which is residential. So we have the detox services, we have the residential level of care. Those are the residential program. And then on the same campus, we are able to provide the PHP, community housing, and IOP services as well. And the goal, again, is to encourage folks to not only get clean, but to figure out a way how to stay clean by giving them the opportunity to, once they're feeling well enough, to go out into the community, to work a job, to come back for continued support. And should somebody have a relapse, they're familiar with the clinical and medical team, and they can kind of re-engage in that process. A lot of fear in early recovery. People experience a lot of fear, and our commitment is to really tackle that head on and to create an environment where we embrace that fear and say, hey, you're scared, let's work through it together. We'll support you through that process.
Yeah. Are the folks that are coming to you, are they coming to you to go to detox and then sort of going down through the various levels of care?
Sure. I mean, it varies. Some folks are only able to come for detox. Some folks have a relationship with another IOP program. So we'll encourage them to get healthy and stabilize medically, and then go back to their programs. It varies and it depends, and it's all inclusive.
Okay, yeah. That's great. So with this, let's talk a little bit about the community. We're going to digress for a second.
Sure.
I mean, let's talk about what. Because in a lot of communities, it's not just the Jewish community, but there's, a lot of sort of smaller type of communities, minority communities. You get this whole idea that, I think even with the American Indians are having all kinds of issues with drug and alcohol use.
Sure.
So I'm wondering why, maybe from your perspective, what do you think? Why is that? Why, when you get these little tiny communities, is it sort of so kept in?
Sure. So I mean, I think Russell will agree. This is, it's a family disease. And there are so many interacting systemic issues that are part of what creates that perfect storm of addiction. Family enmeshment, there's a focus on high achieving. There's expectations within the Jewish community as well, and I think that. I don't think it's limited to the Jewish community. I think it has eked into the community. The most insulated of communities are struggling with drug addiction at this point. And I've seen it. I've gotten the calls. I've seen it in communities that I grew up in personally. I've seen it in communities that I've worked in multiple markets. I lived in New York for a little bit, and I saw it there as well. And it happens. I mean, I think that the accessibility to drugs and alcohol today is very different than it was decades ago. I mean, you can have a kid that's in high school or in college that's can have a dealer come to their doorstep from an app that they download on their phone. So the external presentation might look different, but the internal struggle, that loneliness, the void, is ever present. And through social media and other platforms, I think drugs are more accessible today than they were in the 70s and 80s. And that creates that epidemic that we're all seeing.
The other thing is, we had, do you know who Luis Garcia is?
Yes.
Sure.
So Luis was here last week. We did just a Narcan training, and one of the things that we talked about was why was it back in, say, even the 70s and 80s, when you had these guys, these rockers doing tons of drugs, and yet they didn't seem to be dropping like flies, right? I mean, it was rare to hear about an overdose, and yet we read about overdoses all the time, not just here in Florida but everywhere. And I think the one factor that is really changed things is fentanyl.
Our
right?
drug supply is poisoned.
Yeah, our drug supply. I mean, it's not pure heroin or pure coke. I mean, I shouldn't use the word pure, but you know what I mean. It's not.
Yeah.
Fentanyl is the absolute killer, and that'll knock somebody out of the game right out of the gate. I mean, and I just wonder from your perspective what you're seeing in terms of how that's affecting your ability to do treatment and stuff, because the drugs are so much more potent today.
Yeah.
Well, I know I'm a believer. Long-term recovery. Abstinence. That's how I recovered. That's how everyone should recover. I don't feel that way anymore. Because of fentanyl, people are dying, and before I was like, oh, you're on Suboxone, you're not in recovery. That's crap. The road for me, recovery is positive change. I don't want people to die, and if you can capture recovery, using medication, more power to you. I am not a doctor. I don't want to tell you. The doctor knows best, and we support all forms of recovery at Archstone. And whatever, we don't have there's not one path for all. There's many different paths.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because when I first started doing this several years ago, I got into I was giving a talk over actually at a library in Delray, and somebody asked the whole idea of medically assisted treatment, and I said, well, to me that just seems to be taking an illegal opioid and swapping it for a legal opioid. And when when the conversation was over, after we done with the presentation, a mom came up to me and she said, I got to disagree with you. And I said, well, what didn't you agree with? She said, my son was an addict for many years, went through multiple treatment centers, and the one thing that saved him was medically assisted treatment. And so, yeah, I get it. He has to take a medication every day that's technically a controlled substance, but it keeps him alive. And that really changed my perspective on things. Because when the choice is death or taking some kind of legally controlled substance, I mean, it's a no-brainer, right?
Yeah. I mean, just to comment on that, addiction is a disease. It's a disease of escape, but there are physiological dependency that's developed. And the way I think about it is similar to hypertension or diabetes, essentially. It's a lifelong challenge, and just like that diabetic, if he fails to modulate his blood sugar appropriately, he's going to end up with a relapse, and he could end up in the hospital or worse. And that's something that he needs to just acclimate his life accordingly. He needs to understand that after each meal, he needs to take his blood, find out what the sugar levels are and so on. And the hypertension is the same way. Whether it's exercise, it's daily intervention to maintain that quality of life and real health. And the other important component to this is really understanding the admissions process of a treatment center, and that is to get a very comprehensive diagnosis, because that's going to dictate the roadmap for that individual. So we have, obviously we have an admissions team, and within the first 24 hours, an individual is going to be seen by a nurse, by the medical director, by a primary therapist, to understand what they're struggling with, what the backdrop is, and what the systemic triggers are. And that kind of wholesome diagnosis out the gate is really going to dictate their roadmap, ultimately leading them to long-term recovery. Whether it's an MAT track or whether it's an abstinence track, that's going to be determined after that diagnosis is done in an efficient way.
So, the idea that it's a disease of the brain, right?
Yeah.
Like, or it's just a disease like cancer or diabetes. Is that a conversation you have with some of the families? Because I know I do, and it's not an easy one to have. They're like, because sometimes you can't get both parents on the same page.
Sure.
Mom, thinks one thing and dad thinks the other, and sometimes the dad's like, well, why doesn't he just stop?
That's a very challenging aspect of it, especially from your.
If he or she could, they would. That's why
Correct.
we're having a conversation about making the decision for them.
Correct. And Mark, it's conversations like this that really help continue the dialogue. And it's a credit to you and to your team
you.
for putting this together. Thank you again for having us. But really, it's your work, and it's the forum like this to help educate people, because you're in it, you do the work. We're in it, we do the work. But your average person isn't, and they're so overwhelmed by the chaos and the consequences, they don't even have the bandwidth to look at it objectively. And that's
sure.
really, it's about educating the communities on a macro level and educating the individuals on a micro level.
Yeah, I've noticed that. That was one of the things I had to come to grips with the whole idea of what's really going on in the family,
Yes.
with the family dynamics, because it's really the family that's in crisis. Their loved one is like, hey, what's the big deal? I mean, this is my status quo.
Correct.
Right? They don't understand why the family's really having an issue with this, but at the same time, the family's in crisis, and they're having a tough time seeing the forest for all the trees.
Correct.
And that's, so when you're having a conversation about treatment or, about, doing a marching act or a guardianship, that it's almost like they just can't comprehend it because they just don't have the bandwidth. There's just so much craziness going on.
Yeah.
And that's become their norm. They almost don't know how to sort of get around that or get over it.
Correct. I mean, Russell, maybe you could share a little bit about like the process from, once that individual reaches out and they're finally courageous enough to reach out. How do you cradle that person to get them into treatment?
Yeah, I think that's a great question.
You create a safe space within the family, within the parents. The first thing I ask them is, are you safe? Do you need help? Are you in crisis right now? And obviously they are, because they're reaching out. It's so hard to reach out. But the first thing I want to do is make sure they're safe. And so I have a 6 or 7 minute conversation is, are you in danger right now? What can we do for you right now? And then we talk about, your needs. Every alcoholic, every drug addict is different. There's not one size fit all. Obviously, yes, I want to get people into Archstone, but is Archstone Archstone is not for everyone. We are. I want to have a conversations with them and make sure they have the best fit. The beauty of Archstone is we do have a large campus where we can fit, if I have a woman, a 65-year-old, 70-year-old woman saying, I don't want to be around, 20-year-old heroin addicts, even though part of, I'll let the therapist make that determination, but in terms of living condition, I understand that, I get that. It's fear, I don't want to make her fear more. So we have a separate housing for older, but we have the bandwidth.
Great.
We have the bandwidth to do that. We have a lot of other. I talk about his life skills. All parents want. I want my son. I want my daughter to be a tax-paying citizen again, and to be and be okay. And the beauty of the open house was I saw people from 15, 16 years ago that are now big deals in Palm Beach, and they're like, oh, I was in that room. I was in this room. And these are the people we lean on. We lean on our alumni, to help out, to find jobs. They know everyone. So I reassure the parents that yes, your son, your daughter will be able to make it. It's a process. It's not an overnight process. It's not magic. I tell them, this is not 30 days. I tell them it's like you have a plant in your house and the soil is bad. You bring the plant over to Archstone. Archstone nurtures the plant, nurtures the soil. We're not going to put that plant back into the bad soil because it's a family disease. So we bring the entire family, we wrap around the entire family with it. And so when the client is ready to come back to the neighborhood, the soil is clean. It's not damaged anymore.
I love the way you put that.
And the families need a lot of reassuring. They've been through this before. Why Archstone? Why not? There's 1,700 other treatment centers that are vying, for their business. And I try to tell them we are not, a white van that cures everything. We don't, send out our white van and collect people. We have multi-talented. Every different one of our therapists has a different set of skill sets. So we can do a multitude of different things, from EMDR to DBT, and it's love. With Archstone, it is love. Mo is there every day. The therapists are there every day. They know every single name of the client. They know we know all the housekeepers by first name basis. Everyone does, and we say, we have meetings every morning, and it's love. It's caring. Quality care. That's the key, and it's education and love. And if you can love someone back to health with the right education, and that's what I let the parents know.
I love it. That's great stuff. I'm really glad you guys came in. I appreciate you coming in
Sure.
and giving us some insight into what's going on at Archstone. And so maybe you can give out website, email, phone number. And so if folks that see this,
Yeah, sure.
should reach out to Russell?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep. And my phone number, 24, I'm around, is 561-667-1188. And our website is archstonerecovery.com. And our phone number, which is really tiny, is 561-588-5825.
Yeah.
5825. My eyes are.
I don't go anywhere with that, Lisa.
Right,
These are Walgreens
and
specials,
I did.
and every year they get a little bit stronger, and it's tough to get older. But I'm amazed. I didn't realize you were 60. I'll be 53 in a couple of weeks.
Nice, but you do kickboxing, or you do?
Well, I do Krav Maga, which I've been doing for years. But I do it because it's like the one thing I do where I can completely shut out the rest of the world. It gives me peace in my life.
Right, and that is the key. For me, it was photography when I first.
That's right. You know what's funny?
Such
I
a
think
big
I first
part.
met Russell. I used to go to the events and I'd see him with a camera. And I'm like, who's the guy with a camera? He's at every event with a camera.
And I could sit here and talk about God and how I'm talking to you out there, the parents, and you, the son, and you, the daughter. You have a talent that you don't know about. God has given. When I first got to sober, like, well, how am I going to make money? And my sponsor's like, well, God has given you a talent, but you don't know what it is yet. Because I'm getting stoned, I'm getting high. God has given me opportunities, and it's bouncing off my head because I'm so high, I don't know what it is. All of a sudden, I had time, and it takes time. It's not a 30-day process. It takes time to get the brain right. And all of a sudden, when I got sober, I realized, wow, I really love photography, and what a joy it is. And I have, I was teaching photography in Delray and Boca at the museums, and my students have images all across the world, and I see them on Facebook, and my students are, doing photography, and it's just, and sobriety did that for me, and the chance to get sober and the chance to be the person you really are. Don't miss out on it. It's amazing.
I love it. All right, guys, that's all for the show today.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks for having
You're
us.
welcome.
That was beautiful, Mark.
You like
Thank
that?
you. Yep, good stuff.
I got to tell you, maybe you have
make it
another
easy.
call, and you should be. I don't know. I mean, he's like a poet. You got like a poet. He's like a poet there. If you need information about what we do, or just to reach out to Mo and Russell, you can reach us at drugandalcoholattorneys.com on our website. We're also on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Vimeo, just about every. Jay's just nodding his head. You just Google us, you'll find us. You can call us 561-419-6095. You can also email me, mark@drugandalcoholattorneys.com. Until next week, thanks for tuning in.